We have Charlie, Jen, John, and me. Charlie, would you like to go first and introduce yourself?
My name is Charlie Weston. I am a designer at Instabase. We are an AI enterprise startup. I've been working in design systems for the better part of the last decade. Love how they can just build simplicity and process around chaotic development processes, and love the work they do to help standardize development applications. John, I'll pass to you.
Hey everybody, I'm John Delman. I'm on the design system team at a company called Workiva. And my daily is typical design system work where we make components, we answer questions around components, we maintain the reference site and the documentation, and of course, work with our engineering and development partners on our design system team. I have been a professional designer since 1997, so I'm basically 18 years old. And I have been on design systems specifically focusing on it since 2017, 2018. This is my 6th or 7th design system. I love the way the industry's going. Design system because I get to work with people and solve problems. That's why I do the job. So I will pass it over to a wonderful person named Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm a software developer. I've been working in tech for 8 years. My entry point into the industry via an interest in art and creative tech led me to specialize in design systems. Previously worked at Wrangle, Thomson Reuters as a lead developer. Got into the system side of design systems, really interested in enabling people and teams with them. Now I work at Rivalry. I've expanded my horizons across the stack.
Thank you. If you would like to see other Inspect and Reflect sessions, we have one upcoming on the 3rd of April. We are going to dive deeper into Monday.com design system called Vibe. If you would like to join our community, here's the Slack link. All the insights and highlights will be shared there with all the recordings. The reason we started this Inspect and Reflect is because of this design system inventory workshop that focuses on how you can go into the product and start cutting it into templates, into components, into elements, so that you could understand and your product designers could and product teams understand how you are grouping, cutting, naming, and setting up your components. And today we're going to do the same thing for Vercel. There are 2 main parts, product pages and components. For the product pages, here are the screenshots. On the left side are more from marketing. On the right side, you will be able to see the actual product where they have everything related to how to deploy your own code, how to connect integrations, activities, set up domains, see the usage, and all this kind of stuff. As a part of the components we're going to dive into, we created a couple of them. You will see material, show more components, badge, collabs, and others. I will start moving some things from our speakers only board into our public one, so you will be able to see what kind of components we were able to find so far. And maybe first, we could start with a quick overview of design system documentation. Anyone would like to start and share their first impressions of how design system is documented within Vercel? John?
I work in enterprise and we have a very robust system and we spend a lot of time documenting a lot of things. And a lot of systems do, right? You see Carbon, Spectrum, and GitHub Primer and all these ones, lines of documentation. What struck me and like refreshingly was how little of that was in here. And it's this open-ended and terrifying, but exciting at the same time. I don't know what's behind that locked guidelines. It's literally how to do everything and it's overly strict. I doubt it, but what struck me was I can basically make anything. And what it's lacking, and I think what we'll talk about today, is how might I guide in there. And that is fascinating to me because it's a different way of approaching a system from the traditional, where's the storybook, where's the Figma file, where is the exact guidelines, tell me exactly what I need to do. And it's the opposite side of that spectrum in my brain of, go for it, we trust you. And that might just be the size of the team that consumes it, or may just be the company philosophy of like, hey, we want to build this. Maybe we don't want to design this, and maybe it's all happening in code and not really happening in Figma. But that struck me, and that was really fascinating. Why I want to have this conversation.
What's interesting, the less documentation you have, the less maintenance you have from like a scalability standpoint, right? Like if you bare bones isn't always the best way to go in some teams, but the less you have to maintain over time, the more your team can focus on X, Y, and Z, and less things that are maybe, documentation focused.
What we have here is minimal and sufficient examples of on the documentation side. I appreciate the ease to kind of click on one of these typography scale, copy the class. If you look at the typography thing, every single one has a code sample, but it's minimal. Before this session started, we remarked how surprised we were that there wasn't a storybook link. There wasn't a lot of documentations about when to use what. Whereas Vercel, the brand itself, is very prominent, I think, the developer community. But generally, I think as an intro, I don't have a problem with that. I'm expectant of more docs, but even without, it's pretty clear what's used for what.
Jen, and you're coming from engineering side, right? Do we actually need storybook when we have such level of documentation within public design system? Do we need a storybook in this case, or if those examples are enough?
I think was the intent of Storybook initially, to help with isolated component development and testing. It's definitely been a tool I felt close to in terms of developing design systems for different frameworks. This is a different, much more minimal example. If you're able to show the code clips and provide some direction as to how to get started for developers. And sometimes I think there is that tension between getting the design system out versus focusing on the dev experience, documentation, command line instructions. So it wasn't immediately easy for me to find that starting point where you might vision the command for installing something. There is a presumption that someone's using Next.js, React toolchain framework, with a lot of front code. React being super popular, it's probably not too hard for people to figure that out.
You know what struck me is interesting? So patterns, it's just components. My first thought was, it's an emerging design system. Maybe they never got to that, and that might be true. I don't know. Log estimation. But there was something refreshing about the lack of patterns and examples. It felt very open-ended and a lot of trust and respect to those who might consume it. It's always important to say with design systems, they're all catered to product and the teams using them. There's not a one size fits all. I really believe that, to Jen's point, they understand they're consumers of this system, and there's already assumptions being made about exploration with technology, how to use what code base, and also probably just comfort allowed around ambiguity. They look like there's a big leap of I trust my customers will use this, are cool with ambiguity, and don't need specific guidelines. There are moments where I'm they could have given guidelines, and they chose not to. If you look at the buttons, they have all the different colors, and it's you could just put the text to be this is a danger, this is a warning, but they're upload. It's almost like you had that opportunity to be this is, this is that, to just demonstrate. But then you look at the code, and it's obviously the code says it's an error and a warning. So maybe the expectation is people aren't going to look at that. They're just going to go straight to the code and just use and consume. It was interesting. It's they're guideline adverse. We're allergic a little bit to it.
I think this touches on one of the aspects that were brought up in our initial meeting. It raises questions of who the audience for the design system would be. In the dev community, gateway funnel into Vercel is through using it for hobby sites or smaller projects. And then there's also the folks who use it for enterprise because they're emerging startup and have time to hire a whole DevOps team. But I do wonder, are there businesses within Vercel we don't even know about? Usually a design system is for a brand that has multiple products or features. So I don't know if anyone here knows more.
I think about this system a little bit linear. I don't have deep insights into that, but I watched some videos and they talk a lot of their designs. They don't hold the design as sacred. It's more about build, iterate on build. The lack of a Figma file, it feels like go in and prototype, make this code, screen cap, move stuff around, adjust in code, this live environment of hacking, which is a different way of a lot of companies big enterprise company. I love this because it's really flexible in that regard, and it empowers your developers, engineers, and your designers to make decisions without being, I think that's a lot of empowerment. If I was a designer there, I would feel super empowered. I could do whatever I need to do to unblock myself.
Love it. And one of the questions that we had before is all the design systems that we took a look before was more for enterprise. And this is a smaller SMB company that is merging. Hopefully they will get successful soon. I guess this is cool. We can call it as MVP, right? Just some really some code examples, details for now could be a great start for SMB companies to start documenting, connecting people, and seeing efficiency gains across the organization. Great. So let's dive into one of the components that we see here. The first one is called material. So we had some questions, and maybe some people, Jen or Charlie or John, will able to dive into that. Let's start with material component.
Yeah, the word material almost sets off alarm bells in my head from building other design systems. But here we have material. I think John mentioned, or even Charlie mentioned, it's like the paper.
Yeah, we'd call it paper, I guess, in our system. I think my confusion was there's a foundation called materials in there. And this material, I guess, uses another component, which is stack. And starts the wires get all crossed. I could see people getting confused, but I think once you understand it from an engineering perspective, it's probably a little easier than from a design mindset. So that may be a glimpse into where their thinking is. But
Naming things, it's always the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stack part is easier from our perspective even to understand. Charlie, do you have initial impressions?
I mean, I agree that the nomenclature between materials is confusing. Materials is like the stack of cards and how they're doing the framing. From a branding standpoint, it's literally pulling from Google. You think material in a design system, you think of something completely different. That seems to be the name they've landed on. I do appreciate their material breakout. Instead of having how they look at the surfaces, how distant the component is from the base screen, and they actually have nomenclature around base, small, medium, large, and even deeper into tooltip, menu, modal, full screen. So it's clear when you're using these components what the actual application use case is. Where I feel like a lot of times design systems, you have some range of 1 to 3x for how big maybe the gradient, the border is, but actually giving semantic example that makes it a lot clearer for teams implementing this, where to use this, how to leverage it, what is right for what scenario.
That it then is a surprising similarity that showed the material, specifically the elevation modal, or to represent the elevation tool, where there's 4 examples, but then the scale for materials. It's not immediately obvious when I first looked at it, but it definitely jumped out to me as a very different way of defining both a component and the token primitives.
So I feel like we also spoke about that during our previous Inspect and Reflect for Node design system. They had card component, but it was more like a container where you can just put things inside. It had some kind of border with some shadow giving you this elevation, right? But it was just one level elevation and more like a card container. I guess here, after going into examples within Vercel, it's not the same as elevation components where you can set up the depth of your component. If you have multiple components being part of each other, you could use those elevation containers to pop up some content inside. For Vercel, it's more as just a container, right? Any thoughts on the examples? We see I've tagged here some of them, and again, it was confusing to take a look into all these material components, because usually for all their components they have a way to name. So I can see that for the link, it's pretty straightforward. It should be a link component. For this specific one, There is none for this card. They're using stack components, but for all the examples I went through, I couldn't find this material component is in actual use anywhere. Maybe they documented it but not using, or maybe you feel like they are hiding them within the code itself. Any thoughts on that?
What this clip or these code clips show is the result of the compiled or bundled output. All of that's transpiled already. If we looked at it through React DevTools, we might see the way the components are composed. We might see it in the guts instead of the final product. From the stack example, it's more easy to understand. There's definitely conflation even as a developer. Sometimes we might receive something that is based off a scale of like 14 elevations. And your manager's just telling you to get something out quickly. So you reach for what's already in the existing styles to kind of create that effect that won't exactly match the design. And so maybe that's why there's so few examples and so few token scale. It can be a bit frustrating when you don't see them used in a lot of places. You have to create those individual tokens. Would have to be viewed almost like the developer lens on the code or through DevTools.
So I'm coming from design background, so always use inspect within Chrome browser, right? The DevTools. But you mentioned React. Is it better to take what's the difference between React DevTools and the regular DevTools from Chrome?
I think both are great. Chrome is extremely tooled to do inspection done for React DevTools or any other extensions. They take into account the framework and the way the code can be compiled or built locally to view and inspect components. If anyone tries to run React DevTools at a site that's already deployed, you can't. You can only run it on a local build. A bit like using inspect on Chrome. And we also use inspect on Chrome to do development as well and performance profiling. But whenever we use that, that's like looking at the page in its complete file. It's had all the processing, building of the code. It uploaded onto a server and served to you. Kind of not in work in progress on my machine state. I guess that's the best way to mention the difference.
Love it. Any final thoughts on material component, Joe?
I was looking at that choice box, another component, and I don't think they really mentioned material, but there's clearly something going on with material and that surface. It has a focused blue state, which is probably why they separated it. To Jen's point, this is using material. But they don't overtly say this uses material. They really want to say radio and checkbox are the primary things, and you can combine it on spoken language. It uses material as its base. It has its own styling focus state where you don't see that in materials. You really just see elevation and order radii and that scalability. So yeah, I think there's a few of those in the system that are like unspoken, like this will be using just same reason like this will be using the grid too. You don't think you need to see that.
Right? Have you seen some really good examples of how elevation is done within other design systems? Maybe some learnings on how do you override tokens when you're using elevation? For example, within IBM layer component, you can define the depth. If you put the same input component into level 2, it will change the color tokens inside automatically, so it will be darker or brighter to give depth. Any thoughts on elevation? Maybe some good examples that you found in the market?
I was going to say IBM. When we were building our system initially, we looked at IBM Primer, GitHub, because I really appreciated the robustness of the documentation, but also the split between the designer and developer engineer need. You could tell a lot about a company through their design system, like what matters most. We wanted to split because we're kind of 50-50 in our consumption. Well, we're a lot more engineering, if we're being honest, but like we wanted to make sure that our reference site honored both. So they had a central forum. We looked at Primer for that. I got a lot of my early ideas around elevation from a system like that. I like how they approached it. Carbon was outside of the grid, which I still struggle with. Their little tiny box grid. It's a pretty solid system, and I often go back to understand how they're approaching really granular things.
John, you mentioned primary design system, right? How the component is called?
The elevation, I believe, is foundational one. They literally redid this like yesterday or something. I was like, it's like the same but different at this. It's more modern. It's really nice. I believe it was in their foundations.
Yeah.
I'm
Found
all
it.
lost
Okay.
now because it's like a totally new. Yeah, it was within layout. I think they were doing that scalable, and then the breakpoints padding. Let me find that they have also a responsive section as well.
Mhm. Great. So let's dive deeper into other component. So another one is show more. It's pretty simple, but maybe this is the example when they created the component but didn't use it within the product. Maybe they changed something based on some data metrics. For the show more component, here's the overview. Styling components to show expanded or collapsed content. Here's what looks the horizontal line with the show more button. The only place where I found this component is within the usage. When we see this usage section, there is a button to expand. This is how it looks, right? It's just another variation of this component where there is no label at all. Maybe this is another opportunity for the design system guidelines, or maybe they should mention it as well, like to this show more button, show more component could be without label at all, right?
I like that's, but to me, that's a strength and not a weakness. We don't need to have the text there all the time. Are we going to have people go, what happens if I don't have it? Is that really a problem if someone doesn't put the word show more? If they do put the word show more, it's consistent. And it's like, well, we never ask consistently right. I love this flexibility of, hey, you don't need to say the word show more because you're deep into a product. The component can handle that. Adjust, Like, I think that's interesting. Any other system would be like overly documenting scenario. Don't do this. And here's the exact text. Without the text there, I have problems because it wouldn't be apparent, but it is easier to internationalize. I like the respect that they show to people who consume this. That's okay if you want to stream. Nobody's going to die.
Do you think when they pushed it through, did they get approval first, or they just push it, ask permission later, and see if anyone caught it? Because there's no documentation across Vercel do's versus don'ts, which I think is an interesting strategy for a system at this scale.
I think they're a small company. I don't think they have that approval bottleneck. You know what I mean? I looked at, we got more people on teams at our company than they have in their whole thing. And the makeup of that team, they're just all design engineers. That says to me they're going to be in the code a lot, right? Some of them are founders of other places. We get a higher level of design engineer, you can give them locked liberties. Whereas I think a lot of companies don't have that option. There's a huge spectrum of designers who don't have code experience, engineers who don't have any design experience. What's I think beautiful about a bit like Vercel is that mixture, that next version of what professional product designers can be, which is a design engineer vibe, which I really appreciate. And I think that enables them and empowers them to be really minimalistic on how to hold it or do a thing with it. If you think it's good, go with it. They may just be that fast and loose. I don't know. I think it's minimal breakage. If one thing doesn't have to show more text, the other ones do. Is that really a problem? Do we really need 3 VPs approving? I've worked at companies where the answer would be absolutely yes, but I'm jealous that they may not.
And I have a quick question, Jen. Why do they have this data Geist button parameter within their element? The same applies for data version. Are they using specific library? Why do they have these kind of things in code?
Their attributes could be used just to store certain data. It sometimes is used for unit testing. So you might have seen people data test ID so that the element can be recognizable for visual functional testing as well as visual regression testing. data itself, if anyone wants to look at the MDN docs, it's an expanded attribute property. It can be used to store information of the component. And other times, like data is used to just store like code, like people do that in SVGs. So yeah, I think it's just there because of how they've decided to design the code.
So,
But yeah, I did open reactive tools on the site just now. I had trouble attaching screenshots, but it does break out into a lot of their kind of base components, such as link. They're using a link for the show more button. And there are a lot of components that aren't named in the designs. That's another thing we see with design systems. Yeah.
do we
How
think
the
this is a button?
composition differs.
Jill, do you think this is actually just a button? It's not the show more button. It's maybe the button just as a shape.
It's not a component called show more. It's
Yeah.
just button probably is constituted. It could be a link around a button, or it could just be a div that has a link around.
You see a lot of that in their inputs too, with the combo box and the input. There's a lot of mixing and matching throughout here, which is very flexible. It could be confused. If you're traditionalist and you go to a reference site, you're like, show more. Wait a minute, where's the text? And you're like, oh, sorry. We actually think it's totally cool if you just want to use button. For teams get bamboozled because they're looking for strict guidance, and systems are like, we trust you. And I think this one would be like, just use button. I think it takes people a little getting used to of like, oh, I don't have to use the show more to do the thing. I could just use button.
I think it hits the developer side and you're implementing. There's definitely been times you get locked in by making something that's already out of the box. I'm going to use a tree component as an example with very specific behavior. And later finding out that teams don't want to use that, select everything kind of component. And that's already baked into the tree component. There might be reasons why you don't provide all in one. If you can do it with just a button and make sure you use these styles or something.
Love it. So let's move into the badge component. Any final thoughts on show more?
I don't know if
we
I would
can
consider
move-
show more to be like progressive disclosure. Like, I think that's a conversation we often have in our system of like accordion, progressive disclosure. When do we use a thing? So this is this wonderful gray area of like, could it be a button? In our system, I think we call that an icon button too. Like, I love the flexibility of this, but I can absolutely see the confusion brought with that flexibility also.
Yeah. Especially, with this, they have an expand collapse section, right? So like there's a little bit of a nuance you're doing. And the main difference there is you have an animation player attached to that. So that becomes
It's my internal dashboard and there is no animation. It's just like snap. And then there's 5 or 10 more.
Yeah.
I think if there were specific decisions around the animation UX, that's an area of design systems discussion, the experience that doesn't get very much attention as far as animation or interaction responses.
Great. So let's move to the next one. It's called badge component. And we had some discussions because it's a little confusing because within the badge documentation, they have peels. Let me copy this. Let me just go here and I'll go here. So there's 2 components within their navigation. They have peel here and they have badge on the side nav. But it's actually the same page because if you will scroll up the peel, you're actually getting into the badge component. So here are different variations that they have, like different colors, different sizes, and they have options with icons, and they have the peels, right? The peels are clickable when the badges are not. And here are the components that I was able to find within Vercel. The first is the plant badge within the main header. It's available right here. The second usage of this badge components is more like a counter where you will able to see how many domains are available for this specific deployment. And the third badge is more with an icon where they are showing if it's current or not. So I guess this is the variation of the component that they mentioned around having icon inside the badge. Any quick highlights here? High-level observations?
I think if I was designing it, the only time I might get confused is like, am I only supposed to use pill when I have another brand logo? Am I going to use my iconography? I think that would be the only confusion in that. And I guess we talked about this, about the interactivity of it. Is one just messaging? Is one a clickable button kind of state? That's a big differentiator.
The styling difference, right? The pill was the one they want you to select into, and I think that's maybe why the design of that is the white background versus with badges, you have the option of a little bit of a color, even gradient background in some cases. And if it's something that has an interactive component, something you can probably attach a 1-2 pixel border on, have that white background, and then maybe use color to give a warning of some type of alert section if you need to, but then you'll have to worry about that balance of contrasting the purple notification with the blue background or something that's never going to look right across a unified string.
Any interesting learnings during your implementation of badge or pill components in your projects?
Good.
Yeah, I think someone's going to say something. So I just copied a screenshot over to the speakers. It is the kind of inspection from React Dev Tools, where you can see, they call it multi-zone link. It's kind of like a composite component. Every one of those badges or pills are called multi-zone link, except they're clickable. And clicking into each one is taking me either to the preview, the GitHub source, or the particular deployed domain. It looks like ABCDE. That's probably because it's the commit. It opens up into the deployed version of the blog. Fascinating. I thought it was this component from some library, but it's actually made up of this. So yeah, pretty on the fly, but looks all right.
Does Vercel have a tagging function? Because I'm not seeing an end adornment icon on the dismissible aspect of it. Would it show
there's
up?
no O's.
Would there be an opportunity to use a badge in an input, for example, combo box or autocomplete? Let me see if combo box.
Yeah, that one is a very gray area because how you build something like that versus one that's not clickable and not interactable is completely different. Usually that creates decision point whether you decide to nest those variants to optionally provide that feature when developers need to use it, or do you create completely different code? In either case, I'm just surprised that they're named really anything, but it works.
So what is that we're looking at? Is that badge? Is that some other unique snowflake in the adverse? What is that?
No.
I mean, it does follow the convention of dismissible chip. It's inside a selectable or a select options, or
it's disabled. I'm not able to interact with it. So
it definitely has a use case, and it makes sense. If I'm not from a UI's perspective, confused at it, which is good. And I don't see it as improper usage. I'm surprised that it wouldn't just called out hey, by the way, you can have an end door. Because they did make a point to call out, you can have this with icons, those end icons. How might I do that? Complicated, but maybe they just assume you'll figure that out.
End composition elements, right?
Exactly.
Those are hallmarks of the design system in terms of how to use, or you can just use these and the rest you can put together.
Let me move to the next one, the input component, because there's so many interesting things happening. Here are all of them, right? So it retrieves text input from a user. So they have different variations of the size. They have prefix and suffix for different aspects, like providing, for example, domains and other stuff, disabled state, and the search. And also, I guess they are combining it with from the components that I was able to find within the product, here are all of them that I was able to find. This one is, I feel like this station. It's called Search Input. It's available within the project. They're using input container here. The next one is the search with options. So it's combined with a dropdown.
I would call it an autocomplete. I would call that a couple bucks.
True, you're right.
Yeah.
There is one. Thank you. Great. Another one is filter queries. And this is more like inline search. So it will not reload the page. It will just filter out the local data. They have some interesting things here happening as icon size in some kind of different way. But I guess because that's part of the styles.
They're using CSS variables, or it's being interpolated in outgoing shells.
Any high-level thoughts on the input components? We could dive into details after that.
Like this prefix and suffix section on the inputs. I also really like the visualization of it. It's a really nice input from a visual language perspective. I think I would struggle a little as a designer. I'd love to see a little bit more examples of how a label would work with all those. If it's like kicked in and there's a label, understand how that might work. Like what is it? Is that default? Is that the label, or is there a label above? I don't know if there's necessarily a wrong answer if you put a label above it when something that's terrible. It's like you've over-explained a thing, but when you have a label at the bottom, how do they work together? I'd like to understand that. So a little bit more clarity when I design this. Because I would want to use this in a lot of places. I'd be like, oh, it's amazing. I want to use it. But what if I needed a label?
What is that matrix of like, you want documentation on how to use this versus you don't, right? There's just kind of like in your mind, John, it depends on the situation, depends on the application of what you're building and designing.
Yeah, I don't want to do this, don't do this scenario. I think what I personally think this system referencing benefit from is examples. Just the sections, I think, is that ambiguity. A lot of people, and this is just maybe human nature, when they encounter a thing that doesn't say you can, they just assume you can't. I wouldn't want someone to be like, don't do this. Or I'd just be like, hey, have you ever thought about using the label with this? If they have specific ideas around alignment, for example, on the default, like, that would be nice to know their expectations. Hey, just in this scenario, we expect it to be kicked in or not. I think that might not work.
It's absolutely fascinating. I don't know if it's a consequence of the way this was designed. First of all, it worked great, and it's even tabbable, which is awesome for accessibility. But I noticed that the icon is actually part of the label, and the label is deliberately hidden. So I guess they're doing something else to make the connection between the fact it's a search input to a screen reader. It's fascinating still, though, because very strict corporate and not public-facing sites would require the label to be shown above the field.
Oh, yeah. Like the idea that I would even ask, like, what is wrong with you? Why do you hate accessibility or something? Yeah, to your point, Charlie, I don't want to do this, don't do this maneuver. I think in a lot of teams and a lot of designers, and I can only speak for designers because I'm one, love examples. Like,
yeah.
I think this system would be cool to have examples of where we see things being used, even to prime the pump on inspiration. Have you thought about doing it this way? The design system has a big part to play in that. It's an inspirational source. Instead of saying, do this or you're bad, I love get inspired by the way we've toyed with it.
Well, and that could be a way around the challenge with documentation and showing different examples. Here's what good looks like in environments. Here's, scenarios where we've used parts of the system to build either internal or third parties have built this out. But yeah, that would be great. It kind of shows
team members and team. When people come to our office hours and they want us to tell them good or bad, that binary choice, sometimes there's no binary choice. A lot of times it's like, what do you think? You're the designer. There's this contention between design and design systems of, I've got to tell them exactly what to do. I want to go the other direction and be like, What do you think? You're the expert in this product space. Yeah, that's totally cool if you want to put a label above it or not. Show us.
That discussion has circled back for 2 quarters before whether you use the label with the asterisk for we're only going to indicate optional. Yeah. As a developer, we end up building like all the options on then they also wrap a label. They're complete. It's always, there's tension, right? Because once you do that documentation, you have to code the stance and maintain the docs. I think this one is definitely more loose.
We are out of time. Let me just pull up all the tagged components that we have. We have collapse components, and I had some questions there because it's not following the guidelines. This is another opportunity for us to learn. Calendar components, buttons, empty states, and looks like some of them are custom made and some of them are like empty state. They are more like a paywalls for paid features. Let me also add some more things here because we have notes, select, split buttons, tables, and others. If you also want to dive deeper and see how those components are being used in action, feel free to duplicate our community board where you will see how those components are being used within the product. You can click and see where exactly those components are. You can also do some discovery mode where it highlights all the components in action. If you would like to see other inspect and reflect sessions, feel free to join our community on Slack. If you have discussions related to how to name things properly, feel free to ask them there. The community is growing, so this is great. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Charlie, Jen, John, for all your thoughts and insights. I'm sure the community will find it very valuable. All the resources will be available within the FigJam. The recording to the session will be available within the event page itself. Hopefully, in 1 or 2 days, it will be available. Thank you very much for joining the session. Any final thoughts, John, Charlie, Jen?
I am inspired by this design system. I really am. I'm terrified and inspired at the same time. I am now on a personal quest to figure out what the book component is for. Because like it is scalable. I feel like I'm being trolled a little.
Oh yeah, we forgot book.
It's beautiful. Design-wise beautiful. And I'm like, where does this get used?
And you could completely see a grid of books. Like, if Vercel got into print on web design,
Stripe
things just...
I just want to believe it's an Easter egg. Somebody put it in, and they couldn't take it out. It's a great component they're using, and it's just a labor of love. But maybe there's a deeper meaning somewhere.
It is a gorgeous component. I just have zero idea how I would ever use it like a project, maybe.
Its overflow would be troubling.
Well, this is scalable.
Thank you very much for all your insights. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hey.